Gotta fix the lights so you can see my face. Is that a spider? Wait! Oh my gosh, I dropped it. Hi, I am so glad you're here. Springtime is here and I need to do some spring cleaning. A lot of spring cleaning. So much spring cleaning. One thing I'd like to clean out is my scrap paper drawer. Much like a dragon hoards his gold, I have been stashing scrap pieces of paper away in a drawer for a little while now, in the hopes that I'll be able to make my own paper. Have I ever made my own paper before? No. But I'm gonna do it anyway. From what I can tell by my expert research, you just blend the paper up with some water, make this paper sludge that you then put into a screen, press the water out, and lay the sheets out to dry. That's only 2 ingredients and only like 4 steps, so how hard could it be? At the end of this, if I do manage to make some paper, I'd like to bind it all together and make a little notebook. I've tried some very thoughtless bookbinding before. By thoughtless, I mean I did 0 research and just flew first class by the seat of my pants. So I've technically made notebooks before, but they're not very cleanly made, and they're barely holding it together. Can't relate at all. So this time around, I'll definitely do more research so as not to waste the paper I just made. Ooh, I'm so excited to try it. I'm gonna make some paper. Even though it seems pretty straightforward, I think the longest part of this process is going to be blending it all up, because I can't imagine that that's going to be a super easy fun time. In my imagination, that's probably the most challenging part, and that's what I have to do first. So I'm gonna go get to work. And get to work I did. I gathered the paper scraps from the drawer, grabbed a bin, and started shredding. In this first batch, I'm going to do all of the pink or brightly colored paper first. I have a lot of pink paper because a college professor required that we buy pink paper for all of our assignments, and of that ream, I think I used maybe 10 sheets the entire semester. So now I still have the rest of it that I use for patterns and general sketches. That's mainly what these paper scraps come from, printing patterns or patterns that I'm making myself. I let it soak for a couple of hours before I started blending. This process was interesting, to say the least. The immersion blender I'm using created a bit of a vortex in the water, sucking it straight down to the bottom of the bin, which prevented scraps from coming in, but then if I took it out too far, it sprayed water everywhere, so it took a while to find the balance. Once it looked absolutely disgusting and mushy, it was time to use the paper screen. This is just 2 wooden frames hinged together, and one side has a mesh screen to filter out the water. Gauging how much paper pulp to put in the screen took some practice because that first sheet was thick. But once the screen was full of pulp and the water had mostly drained out, I took a sheet of paper towel and gently pressed more water out of the pulp. After that, I turned the sheet out onto a towel and used a sponge to soak up even more water before gently removing the screen. And there I had it, a piece of sopping wet paper. I repeated this process for a long time, messing up here and there, mainly with removing the paper towel and removing the paper from the screen. But eventually, I got into a bit of a groove. Okay, that was not a difficult process. It definitely took a minute to get into the groove of it. Some of the pages are a little wonky and missing corners, but it went well, and I think I'm gonna have to stop here because the paper pulp is so thin that I'm barely getting a sheet out of it anymore. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shred up the remaining paper that I have, soak it overnight, and then continue making more paper tomorrow. So I'm gonna go shred some paper and toss it into the bin, reusing the same water, and I'll see you tomorrow. Wait, are you coming up? Come here. Are you gonna sit down? Hello! It's the next day. The paper I made yesterday is still drying. It's laid out in different locations because I figured being on a flat surface would just the moisture would just kind of pool, and then that side would take longer to dry. So I flipped everything over and put them in various places around my living space, but the other scraps of paper have been soaking overnight, so I'm gonna go and make some more sheets of paper. I think I have a better handle on what I need to do to get it into the tray and out of the tray now. I also dried out the paper towels that I used yesterday so that I can reuse them today because it felt wasteful to use so many paper towels for this process in the name of recycling and upcycling. But really, the paper towels worked the best. I did try it with a cloth at one point and it stuck to the cloth. I tried with my fingers, it stuck to my fingers. For some reason, the paper towel is the best option to push the moisture out. So I decided to dry them out overnight. So the paper towels are fully dry. The paper sheets are still drying. But yeah, that's the only update I have. So I'm gonna go repeat this process however many times more more and make some more paper. I think it's gonna make quite a bit more because I used, I did add a lot more paper than the first time. And then I think once I've exhausted all of the paper pulp, I'll lay them all out in here because I have a dehumidifier machine in here, which will hopefully aid in the drying process. I thought about hanging them up to dry outside, but it's going to storm. So that's the opposite of what I would want to happen. I'm gonna go get to work. Can I get up? Do you hear the rain? It's just rain right now, no thunder. You don't like thunder, do you? It's not thundering yet. Oh, my window's open. Shoot, we gotta go. Blending the paper the second time around was way less stressful. However, I did have to add a lot more water to thin out the texture. Once it looked like forbidden oatmeal, I knew it was ready. It took a sheet or two to get back into my screening groove, but after that it was smooth sailing. For a few hours, I made as many sheets as possible before I reached a point where I was a little tired of the process. I spread the sheets out in front of the dehumidifier to dry them out overnight, but I still had some paper pulp left over after draining out the water. I decided to try pushing it into some molds to make some little shapes. I made 3 in this hair clip mold and made several shapes in these generic pendant molds. Okay, I made a ton of paper. It took a while, but I think I worked through most of the pulp, and when I reached a point where I was just kind of done with the process of making the paper, I drained all of the water, pressed some into some little molds, so we'll see how those turn out. But at this point, everything has to dry before I do anything else with it. Even the sheets from yesterday are still a little bit damp. But now it's a waiting game, so I'm gonna call it a night on, well, on this project anyway. I have other things I'm working on, but I'll check back in with you tomorrow, so I'll see you then. Hello. It's the next day. Would you like to come up? Hello. You have to sit down, my stinky love. So most of the paper was dry today. I'm honestly surprised it's not all dry. In fact, the ones that are still a little bit damp or very wet still were very much in the middle. I don't even know. There wasn't even a consistency in positioning with the ones that were still damp. Very randomly placed pieces were still damp amidst all of the dry ones. So I'm not sure what that's about. So I did gather up all of the dry ones, and I think I'm going to just bind the ones that I have because this should technically be the last day I work on this project. But it might take a little bit longer because I think I have to press them because this is their current state. I know, look at that. That has your hair all over it. There's a little bit of you in every single one of these pieces of paper, bro. There was a lot more warping and distortion of the shape than I thought there would be, but I did press some of the dry sheets that I had from the first batch. This is what they look like after pressing. You wanna see? So I think I'm gonna have to press the other stack of pages because I cannot imagine trying to bind these together as is. Just not gonna happen. Let's see if we can get a side by side. Before pressing and after pressing. So I think I'm definitely going to have to press this stack while I work on binding this one. I think the goal right now is to bind the pink pages into a little drawing notebook for my little sister, and then the more plain pages will be a sketchbook for myself. Now I did realize that I could do like a 3-hole punch type thing and bind it loosely like this and retain this size, but I think typically with bookbinding it's done in the middle of a rectangular sheet and then it's folded in half, and I think I want to do that. And from what I understand, there are groupings of pages that are bound together, folded in half, and then the stacks are laid on top of each other with the binding facing outwards and then glued together, and then all of the other binding of the cover happens. Given how thick these are, I think I'm gonna have to do 3 pages per grouping and work from there because I don't know that I'm gonna be able to fold more than 3 pages at a time in a grouping. So I'm gonna put this other stack of pages under the same press I used for the other ones, which is just my box of paints. So I'm gonna go press our wild looking stack there and get to binding the first batch. First things first, I put the other papers under my makeshift press. Then I watched a video from Bitter Melon Bindery on bookbinding tools. They mentioned using wax coated thread, which I don't have, but I do have candles and string, so I made my own by melting the wax down and dragging the string through the puddle. Then I divided the paper into groups of 3 pages and started folding them all in half. I found folding 3 at a time to be quite difficult, so I folded each one individually. On the folded sheets, I measured points at every ½ inch to make holes in the fold for when I have to sew them together, and I started with an awl like they use in the video, but my paper is so small and it made rather large holes, so I ended up using a large needle instead. After they had all been folded, measured, and punctured, it was time to sew them all together. Next, I put a piece of sewing stabilizer on the spine with some tacky glue. Is this the right kind of glue? I have no idea, but it's what I have, so it's what I used. Next, I chose the fabric for the cover. I also used some cardboard from my stash to make the front, spine, and back covers, using the paper's dimensions as a guide, and leaving some room to fold the fabric over the edges all the way around. I started to put the end pages on the front and back covers, and I shouldn't have. I did this in the wrong order and ended up re-gluing the end pages on later because the cardboard was supposed to be glued to the fabric first, then the end pages glued to both the paper and the covers, because the end pages would cover the fabric edges, but we'll see that later. I called it a night after this because I had a splitting headache from the smell of the candle I used, so I skipped the outro and intro, and here we are the next day. First things first, I rewatched the tutorial to refresh my brain and realized my mistake with the end pages. So I started by making these little tabs. I've already forgotten what they're called, but they help hide the top and bottom edges of the spine after the cover is on. Then I cut the end pages off to redo the process properly, which involved gluing the cardboard pieces directly to the fabric, giving enough space between them to be folded and house the paper, then gluing the folded edges of the fabric down all the way around. Now is when the end pages go in, and luckily I have a lot of this pink paper to use. This little book for my sister was basically done, and I switched it out with the other paper under the press to get started on another one. I made a lot of paper, and having seen the size of the first notebook, I realized there was no way I was going to fit it all in just one more. So I divided what I had in half and got to work. Just like the paper making process, my second attempt at bookbinding was much smoother than the first and was done a lot faster. The rest of the pages didn't flatten out quite as well as the others, so I didn't want to try wrangling them into another little notebook. Instead, I tried using a hole puncher to make it easier to sew them together along one side, but the big hole puncher didn't quite make the cut, literally, so I used an individual hole puncher instead. After they were all done, I sewed them together more loosely than the notebook so there would be a little bit of wiggle room to turn the pages, and glued a piece of pleather to the front and back pages for a makeshift cover. Alrighty, everything's done. I'm just waiting for the glue to dry completely, and I'm pressing them all so that they can keep their, well, except for the one. I don't really care what shape that is. I'm pressing the two small books while the glue dries so that the cardboard doesn't warp and become wonky while it's drying. But once they're dry, everything's done, which means it's time for the reveal. I love them. Every time I've gone to Michael's, I pass by the sketchbook section and I don't dare go in because I'll walk out with a sketchbook I don't need. However, I almost fall into the trap every time because by the yarn, they have tiny canvases and tiny sketchbooks on an end cap. And I'm always so tempted to buy the tiny sketchbook. I have exercised self-control every time and have not walked out with one yet, and I don't think I need to buy one, because now I can make them. The process overall took a lot longer than I had originally scheduled for this week's video, but I don't regret it at all. It was very interesting to learn the process as I was going along, and I think my paper sifting abilities definitely got better as I went on, because the first sheet I did, I couldn't even get the hole puncher to punch through it because it was so thick. I think I definitely refined my paper making skills as I continued, and I would definitely do it again. I still have a lot of paper scraps left over, so I'll definitely be doing it again in the future, and I might even invest in a bigger screen to make some bigger sheets of paper. Because while I do like our little tiny notebooks, the bigger the screen, the more pulp it'll use, and the process won't take as long because it's just using up more of the material. But paper making, 10 out of 10. You're recycling materials and with reusable tools to be used as many times as, well, at least as long as the screen lasts. Bookbinding, I am glad I did more research. That video I watched, which I'll link below, was very helpful. The video I watched was actually a list of the tools necessary for bookbinding, but watching them do the process using those tools was what helped me the most. And admittedly, I didn't use all of the right materials for bookbinding. Like the glue is definitely, I think, not the kind of, well, actually maybe it is, I don't know. And this being a more formal attempt at bookbinding, I'm very happy with how they turned out, and I like that I made this tiny little book. It's so cute and small. Everything's better when it's small. And I think because I have a little book and I've already put 2 little guys in here, I think this is going to be a book full of little guys, which I think I'll probably make a series for shorts, filling this book with little guys. And now, as much as I liked the bookbinding process, after doing 2 in a row, I did kind of get a little burned out and just very lazily put the rest of the pages that I had together because I didn't want to do it again with this paper. These also didn't get flattened down as much and would have been way more difficult to work with, but I kind of like this little messy thing that's just good to grab and sketch something out. As far as sketching and drawing and coloring on this paper, with the crayons it gives it a very textured look, mainly because you can't get the crayon wax into every crevice to fully color it in, so the result is very textured. And I was a little afraid with the markers that they would bleed out to the point where you couldn't do a defined line anymore, and it did bleed a little bit. It just kind of bloomed, but it didn't go so far that it would have massively ruined any definitive lines or anything. So that's good. And it did absorb the ink quite well to the point where the color is a bit darker than I expected, and with very little bleeding through, only really on the edges where the paper is thinnest. I have yet to paint in these. What I read online was that watercolor is not a good idea on recycled paper. Using watercolor might cause it to break down a little bit, but I haven't tried acrylic on it. I don't really use oil at all, so at some point I'll use acrylic in my little guy sketchbook. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this process. I can't wait to give this one to my little sister who loves to draw, and I love her art, so I am excited to see what she puts in this little thing. I love my little books, and if you like them too, you can let me know by hitting the like button. And if you want to see what I'm doing next and join the channel, hit the subscribe button, and if you want to know when I post, hit the notification bell and YouTube will let you know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!